Hello, I'm Danielle Smith, president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. I'm collaborating with Common Sense Calgary to interview candidates for the upcoming civic election in Calgary on October the 18th. And joining me now is your candidate for Ward 9, John William Wade. John, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much. I've always followed your career, and
Oh,
it's an honor to be interviewed by you because you're such a fair and even-handed interviewer.
well, I appreciate that. Let's see if we can find a little bit more about your career. So tell us a little bit about what you've done, but most specifically, what you've done that you think prepares you to be on city council.
Well, I've had an interesting pathway. I ended up, after I graduated from the University of Calgary with a political science degree, I went off to Japan and I opened up my own English school. So we were trying to teach people English and communicate effectively with other people through English. And so our motto was for UCAN Canadian English was to raise people's self-esteem using English as a means to build their self-esteem. Then once I had done that for about 7.5 years, we had a staff of 10 people out there. I sold my company. My father was in business brokering and commercial real estate here in Calgary. He invited me back. And then I got involved with him. So we had worked together. And now I've been doing commercial, residential, and business brokering for 16 years here in Calgary. So I've worked all over the city and I've worked with businesses and seen what their experiences are. I spend most of my time in real estate having to listen to people and broker deals. So that started me on my path. With that, then I ended up getting more and more involved in Ward 9, specifically over in Forest Lawn on International Avenue. And so I was joined the International Avenue BRZ, which is a business revitalization zone. We represent the 420 plus businesses along the strip from 26th Street down to the Ring Road on 17th Avenue. And so we, especially the last 9 years, has been a huge amount of change. Yeah. And that's what we've been involved with. So, and then also my involvement with being on the Calgary Seniors Resource Society Board of Directors, where I was the head of fund development to help seniors age in place, which I find is a very big emerging issue here in Calgary. And so with the combination of being on those boards has led me to believe that it's time to take it to the next level in terms of leaving a legacy.
All right. Well, let's then talk about the current incumbent you're running against, Giancarlo Correa. When you look back on his legacy and what he has done, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Yes. I mean, of course, there'd be some things that we do differently. One of the aspects that we ended up having, we were on opposite sides on, is because International Avenue BRZ is the zoning referee for the area. So very few things happen in that area without coming to us directly. So when we had, what we were a little bit disappointed was the lack of involvement that we were given in terms of the Great Neighborhoods document. So that Great Neighborhoods document, we were told that there was to the city of Calgary that there was a lot of stakeholder involvement, but the BRZ is a main stakeholder for the area, and we had very little input on that. We were given approximately 3 weeks with the final document to make a decision on it. And we had to call an emergency board meeting about it so that we could even deal with it. And then we were told to be in favor or not. So we really didn't have a lot of, especially early involvement, stakeholder involvement for me is when you actually go and talk to the decision makers and the people who have input at an early stage, so that way there's less resistance at the end. See, if you get through 3 years on a program like they just did, and then they present their document and they have that level of resistance, the proof is in the pudding. They obviously didn't have effective stakeholder, or they would not have had that resistance.
All right.
So I would have done that very differently.
Okay, so I'll talk to you a little bit more about Guidebook in a second, but just give me quickly top 3 issues you're hearing in your ward.
Well, in Ward 9, we have a few different issues. Number one is we have many companies, business owners who are hurting bad. They're paying the lion's share of our taxes here in Calgary because, of course, the mill rate is higher on a commercial business and property than it is on residential. And so they feel that they haven't been listened to. Then second of all is the lack of transparency between the city council and the constituents. And number 3 would be we have a large rise in social disturbance and crime in the area. And I mean, they're all connected. I think the common stitch between all of them is that people just don't feel like they're being listened to anymore.
Right. So let's talk about taxes, because part of the issue is the hollowing out of downtown and the tax shift that occurred onto the adjacent businesses to try to make up that revenue. And that became too high. There's now a further shift onto residents. How would you solve that problem?
Well, first of all, the actual process by which we get the taxes has been broken for quite some time. We have what people don't understand is that the person who's doing the appraisal on your property is not an appraiser. They're an employee of the city. Okay. And I'm not saying that they're necessarily doing a bad job, but I do note that they do not require to have a license to even be an appraiser. Okay. They just have to be an employee of the city in that department. So we have someone who is determining the value of your property, and then in the other department, they're receiving your money. And in real estate, we don't allow the individual to determine solely the value of their property. We have appraisers that do that. And even if it's just because of, maybe you come up with the same number as the ultimate number would be, but it's the optics, it's the conflict of interest that ensues. That's why we don't allow even the bank to pick their appraisers now. They're done through a system where they're random. Okay, so there's that. The second thing is that we also have a situation where, especially in the commercial realm, because more people on the commercial area, because the stakes are higher, will appeal their taxes. And so some of them are appealing their taxes on an annual basis. It's almost like it's an annual date that they know they're going to have with the city every year. So they actually have companies that they hold on retainer that they have to pay money to fight the city. And so instead of spending their time, energy, and money on their business, they're being diverted into fighting with whom I would really say, I mean, maybe I'm idealistic, but I have a political science degree, which told me that in a representative democracy, we are the employers and they're the employees, but we're fighting with them, right? And so to have that happen on an annual basis means it's handicapping that business owner and their staff from doing the most effective that they can. And when you look at what we've been going through in the last year and a half, 2 years now, with COVID, and then even before that with the fall of oil, like you were alluding to, it's been a recipe for disaster. And so now when they win their appeal, they win for that year, and then they come back to the table again, and it's the same thing over and over again. Also, the final thing is that if an owner does improve their building, and most business owners that I speak to, they want to improve their buildings. Yeah. But the first thing that they notice is that the second that they spend a few $100,000 improving their building, is that their tax assessment is going to shoot up. So now they spent money on the improvement of their building, and now they're going to pay a higher tax rate, even though they're going to use less of our social services, because now their building is in nicer condition and won't encourage some of the problems that other buildings that are not in a good condition would have. So we've got a system that's really playing against the business owners.
Okay,
when we have the inner city in the downtown core, that's part of the problem. So one of the things that we also need to be understanding of is that as a commercial realtor, we've been noticing this problem for quite some time. We're happy that the city is finally starting to acknowledge it, but it's a little bit late in the game. One of the things we could do is and this was a little bit of a tell, is when Amazon started to come to our city and said, hey, we're open for offers to attract our attention to your city. Now, at least an international company who's not even here could get our attention. And so we started to put together a crack team, like a star team that would market the best parts of Calgary to do that. Now, we found out very quickly that we don't rank as high as some of the other cities in the world. That's why Amazon didn't even make the final cut. But it was a good experience, and if we learn from it, we don't have to necessarily go after Amazon, but we could go after other companies and take that experience. We have the package, and we just need to empower people to go out and do that on our behalf.
Let me ask you a couple more specifics about that, though. When you're talking about business attraction, particularly downtown, there's a few levers that you have to be able to do that. You can reduce taxes, you can give tax holidays, you can reduce regulation, you can do what the Calgary Economic Development Authority has done. They've been given $100 million to do direct business attraction grants. What sort of approach do you favor?
I'm in favor. Well, it's a few different steps that I'm in favor of. Number one is I do believe that when you have a company that comes in and brings 500, maybe 1,000 people to your city that are all going to be gainfully employed, I do believe that maybe that we could give them some tax advantages. One of the other issues that we've noticed is that as much as we like to think that Calgary is a pro-business city, like we talk about that in Alberta, the Alberta advantage, when it comes to regulations, we really aren't. We put up quite a few problems, and we'll say it's a minimum of 8 to 12 weeks to just even get a simple development permit. Companies that realize that they're going to go through that level of scrutiny and that level of problems, it becomes an issue. One of the things that we're piloting over in Forest Lawn area is the enterprise program, where we are experimenting with not having to have licenses resubmitted if you have the same use coming into the same building. Now, I think that's a positive that we're experimenting. So if you come over to Forest Lawn and then 409, we're kind of leading the way in that area.
All right.
So it's reducing some of the red tape that's unnecessary, because if you have a building that's always had restaurants, why are you suddenly making that restaurant go through hoops when it's the same restaurant? It doesn't make sense. And it actually costs the city money to enforce it.
That's a great example.
They're not making money off that license. So the tax advantages for the company, if they bring in a certain amount of employees, and that they can show that those employees are residing in the city and for an X amount of time, absolutely. Why would we not want to say thank you to that?
Okay.
They're improving the economy.
Let's talk a bit about spending, because we've talked a bit about the revenue side of the equation. When you look at how much the city is spending, is it, in your opinion, too much, too little, or about right?
I mean, being self-employed, I recognize that there's times, and I come from a self-employed family too. There's times where we have more money, and when you have more money, great, no problem. Put some towards savings, and then maybe you're a little bit more liberal with your spending. Then there's times where you don't have as much money. Business maybe was not as good that year, and then you have to make some tough choices. And so sometimes you have to reduce what you want or make some tough choices. And we don't want to, but we have to. So I would say that what we need to do with our budget is we need to start looking very carefully about how we can start to reduce some of the costs or be more efficient. Or maybe it's not even necessarily to reduce, but maybe it's to defer certain projects that we'd like to do today, and maybe we just delay them and do at a time where it's more advantageous or where we have more money. I mean, that's what we do in business all the time.
So talk to me a bit about how you'd manage the big ticket item on the operating side, which is wages for staff, benefits, as well as the
budget.
There you are. And as well as the administrative staff, the management layers, as well as your own personal salary as a council member. So let's start at that one. Do you think that what councillors get paid is reasonable? Do you think it should be cut?
I mean, I hesitate. I hesitate to say it'd be a silver bullet to say cut the salary. I mean, the salary is $114,000 for a councillor. Okay? I mean, that is what it is right now. After the election, it'll be redetermined, but we'll go on that right now, and then it'll be on another 4-year cycle. So at $114,000, yes, compared to some jobs, it's really good money. But if you compare it to other jobs where it's equivalent to, let's say, an executive director of an organization, it's pretty much on par. And with the hours that you're putting in, if you're really doing a good job as a counselor, it's a full-time position in Calgary. Okay. It's not part-time like it is in a smaller town. And
okay, so, let's go down. Totally understand. So let's go down a layer and talk about city management. Do you think that there is an issue of salaries and compensation at the management level? We've heard stories of double pensions and triple pensions.
When you examine most organizations, it usually is with the management that you find that the most opportunities to become more efficient in terms of cost. And I think that we're starting to see that, because if you look at the overtime that we had, 98.5% of the overtime laid with 1.5% of the people who were in charge. So you start to look at that and you go, it's a management issue, right? And most businesses, when they have problems with finances, it's usually a management issue.
All right, let me move down to the frontline layer then, because often what you'll find with the way collective bargaining agreements work is they're multi-year. They're based on projections of what year-over-year cost of living increases is going to be, and sometimes it's out of step with what's happening in the real economy and what taxpayers are experiencing. There's also movement up the pay grid, just with seniority. Do you think we need to take a different approach to how we pay our frontline?
I mean, I think it would be great if we had a more liberalized way, but because we have a system where we're doing collective bargaining, so for example, we have several people. For example, the fire department, we're not individually paying each firefighter, or the police, or transportation, because we've decided to go the collective bargaining route. You do take a bit of a risk when you do a bargaining for 4 or 5 years because we don't know exactly where the economy will go during that time. I think it would be nice if we had another system to do that. I would be very open to hearing another system, but it does tend to be the system that we find in most cities. So it might be just more along the lines of being careful when we negotiate.
Okay, let me ask you about. We talked about the operating side of the budget. Let's talk about the capital side for a moment, because there've been some big ticket items that have come forward. I'm wondering how you would approach resolving some of the challenges with them. For instance, the Green Line started off with a lot of buy-in, three-party funding agreement, $4.7 billion, 40 kilometers. It's now half the project, and it doesn't go far north and far south, so it's not making anybody happy. What would you do to get that project either back on track, or do you think it should be scrapped altogether?
Well, I think probably the ship has almost sailed on that one because the funding is all being put in now from the federal government, provincial government, and the municipal government now. I think at this point it'd be very difficult to reverse it. However, if you're asking what I would have done differently, I would have communicated it properly. We also know that the original aspect of that Green Line was it was supposed to be a southeast line. It was never supposed to be in the north central. Now, somewhere along the line, probably because there was compromises and people wanted to show that they were doing something for their constituents, they started to have other parts of the city get involved. But this was always meant to be a southeast, because if you look at the types of transportation for the southeast, there's very little in terms of public transportation as compared to with other parts of the city. So they're the most underserved. So that's why it was always there. So then somewhere along the line, we had to go up to the north central and find a way across the river. And that's what's really ballooned up this whole budget. It's the river, right? I don't think it had to be that way. We could have. There's no necessity to have it be done that way. Now we have chosen that, and at some point, even if it's not a perfect project, sometimes you have to. It might be more costly now to reverse it than it would be to continue. So I mean, of course, Ward 9 is part one of the hearts of that southeast line. We've got Shepherd, we've got Ramsey, that are all getting lines. So from that perspective, I know we needed it in the southeast. I'm not convinced that we needed it in the north.
Okay, let me ask you about capital projects too, because when they were first introduced, the CFO warned that they didn't, the city couldn't afford to do all of them, but they were all approved in any case. I'm wondering, if you had been on council, which one would you have prioritized? So we've got the event center with the Calgary Flames, the BMO Center expansion for new convention space, number 3, the Arts Commons transformation, and number 4, the Foothills Fieldhouse. What would be your priority?
Well, I think we would have probably, my priority would be where we have opportunities to bring other people from outside the city. So that's one of my criteria, because if we can bring outside money instead of just having money spent within, that's always better because it's new money. So that would have, started to, narrow it in. So in terms of the new arena and then also the BMO Center, we are lacking in that area. Where we're already missing millions of dollars in outside spending of people coming into the city to spend. Even just on a very simple example, Garth Brooks, whether you like him or not, to me, it's not that relevant, but there are people who are fans and they travel from outside of the cities, even just outside of, not just even necessarily outside the country, but even just Southern Alberta. They come up to Calgary to see that concert. So instead of coming to Calgary, he went up to Edmonton, and there was much more money that was spent up there. I mean, personally, I'd rather see more money come into Calgary than Edmonton. I'm a homer. But that's one of the things. Also, with a convention center, if you don't have certain facilities to host that, then things like the World Oil organizations that come in for, their organizations will eventually get to where they don't come here anymore. And that would be a huge loss of money and recognition around the city, and we would lose our esteem. And I know that some people don't necessarily look at esteem as an important criteria, but believe me, when you're dealing with international organizations that are looking at what cities they want to go to, they do look at that.
All right.
And so when we have that kind of money coming in, so if we can get that money to come in, then it would start to come over to the field house. We are the largest city in all of North America without a field house. And so from a health and wellness point of view, of course, absolutely, we need that. So but I guess the way I always prioritize it, just because like in business, when we have to cut things, the last thing we really want to cut is marketing, because then that starts to cut your throat. You don't have money coming in anymore. So you look at the back end. So the marketing aspect would be the arena, and then would also be the BMO Center to have conventions. And
All
then
right.
from there, we can get more people.
Great. Thanks for that answer. You already mentioned the Guidebook for Great Communities, and so I just want to talk to you a little bit more about some of the concerns that you had there, as well as get your take on how you develop out residential development. So, what was your concern with the Guidebook? I get that it was a sort of a secretive process, sprung on you at the last minute, didn't have much time to consult on it. But is there any basic problem with it?
That is a major concern that shouldn't be glossed over, because in politics, it's not necessarily whether you come to the right or a wrong answer. And quite often, there isn't necessarily a right or a wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's the process by which you come to that answer. Have you included people? Because if you don't, then the legitimacy of whatever your decision is collapses. And so therefore, you could literally have the cure for what ails everybody, but no one would want to participate in that because you didn't come to it with the right process. Okay,
Understood.
So
but is there a specific?
Itself,
can I just ask you, John? I just need a
absolutely.
specific. Is there something specific you heard from constituents that they're concerned about that the plan will enable? I just need to understand a little bit more about what the objections are.
Yeah, there's one aspect. So one is that some of the constituents have been saying that what it does is it actually makes the process of coming to a new development more opaque. It's forcing people, the residential consumer, to start fighting with the developer. And it's going to happen more and more and more, because the document never came up with a really clear understanding of what's going to be permissible and what's not. So now we're going to have more and more fights between the residents and the developers, and that's not fair, because the developers and the residents both just want to know what are the rules of the game. Spell them out clearly. There are parts of the city that we could absolutely do that. Being in real estate as long as I have, we know that there's certain areas that it would be very clear what we could do and spell it out very clearly so that everybody knows. Okay, they didn't do that. The second thing is also with regards to community centers, there are people who are very concerned that they want to reduce the number of community centers around the city of Calgary and condense that into hubs. They call it a hub system.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, I'm always, again, being from political science background, I always have a healthy skepticism of people. And so I try to have systems in place that will reduce the need for a few people. So by reducing the number of community centers, which is where, if we think about it, that's where people have their Girl Guides, they have their scouts, they have their local meetings to communicate with each other. Other people maybe even play gin and they socialize. That's what we should be doing, to come together so we understand where we all come from.
Mm-hmm.
But if we get rid of these organizations and condense it down to just hubs, we put a lot of power in the hands of very few people, and I'm always very worried about that. Extremely worried about that.
That's a good thought. Thank you for that. Let me ask you about the balance that you have in development between densifying and building up versus building new greenfield development and building out. How do you approach that issue especially when we're talking about affordable housing? What do you think should be the balance?
Well, I mean, we need to have a balance between growing out and growing up, and it's been a huge struggle. One of the problems that we've had is we've been labeling different people, with even almost slanderous comments at some points in the history of this debate back and forth between developers who want to develop out or develop up, and we need to stop labeling people and really intently listen to what they're looking for, because we might find that we're not really on opposite sides of the fence. So in terms of making more affordable housing, because you brought that's a huge part of what we need to be doing here in Calgary, is, for example, if you look at other cities like Denver has a policy that X percentage of all new development in their city must have a component of affordable housing. That way it spreads it evenly through the city. Now, this is a big topic for Ward 9, because we seem to have an unusually high percentage of the affordable housing as compared to the rest of the city of Calgary. And when you do that, you run the risk of creating all kinds of extra costs, because now you've almost created a situation where it could go down the path of ghettoization. Okay. So with growing up, we absolutely, I think if you look at it from a natural point of view, Calgary will grow up. And that's just the natural tendency. It will. But we also have to be worried and conscious of what that quality of life will be for those people. So
Okay.
one example is in Inglewood. Inglewood, if you look at the plans, is scheduled to have basically a doubling of their population.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to take two different neighborhoods, stack them up on top of each other. If we want to simplify the way we explain it. Okay. But then if you look, we're scheduled to take away their pool. The swimming pool. Why? Because it hasn't been used as much as it should be, or maybe it's not being run as efficiently as possible. But so then we might stack a bunch of people up on top of each other, but we take away all of their amenities. What kind of quality of life do we have in that city? And I'm quite concerned.
All right.
And also in terms of development, sometimes we do need to listen to the people. So for example, on 9th Avenue in Inglewood, that's another hot button topic, is that they were told by the incumbent that if they could present a business case for not rezoning those three different areas along 9th Avenue, that they would be listened to very clearly. So they got a $26,000 signature petition. And then in addition to that, they went and they got a letter of intent from some people in Hollywood to film more movies there. Because, for example, Fargo has been filmed along that strip because it's such a unique place, because it's the longest strip in all of Canada for that type of era of building. And so it just makes an easy backdrop for all the filming that they want to do. But now, by rezoning three different areas, one at the beginning, one at the end, and one in the middle, where they could possibly have these towers now, that would break it up and have glass fascia, it would completely destroy the air of that. And I mean, what made it really sad was the councillor of the ward was one of the people who voted against his own constituents in that.
Thank you for that example. It's a good one. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the role of the elected council member in just a minute. But there's a few other issues that came up in the last year that I want to run by you to get your take on it. So first of all, when we're looking at delivering city services, I'm curious to know how you feel about private sector delivery of public services. It's been talked about in the context of garbage collection, in the context of running golf courses, and also in the context of snow removal. So give me your take on that. Do you have any particular support or opposition to using the private sector?
I think that it should be something that we look at very, very clearly, very, very carefully, and with a very open mind, because I'm not clear where it has ever said that the city or any level of government is supposed to be a major employer. Now, I know there's some necessity to have some employees in government, but it was never stated that it was, the role of government was never to be the employer. The role of government was to protect the people from within, protect the people from without, and to protect the weak. But having garbage collection, or to have also other services like golf courses, where it's all completely run by the city, I question whether or not that's necessarily the best way. Just because you privatize something doesn't mean that you don't have certain requirements of that business to run in a certain fashion. And if they don't want to do it, then you just don't let them have it. A good example is if you look over in Bowness has coffee shops and ice cream shops. Those are owned by the city. Well, the land is owned by the city, but those businesses are run privately, and they run as a contract with the city. So we already do it anyway. But when it comes to garbage collection, we haven't chosen to do it yet. But I think if we start to look at those bigger contracts, it might be a better way and more efficient. And if we can save some money in the constituents' pockets, that means there's more people who have more money in their pocket to do what they really want to do.
All right. Let me ask you about the Defund the Police movement, which is what it called itself. I'm wondering what that term means to you, and what you think we should learn from the movement.
Well, I mean, I have a certain understanding of the term myself, but I've noticed it's got a real plurality of meanings amongst the people. So it's a pretty loaded term now, and it's almost to the point where the term itself doesn't even have a meaning anymore, because it's so confusing. So when we had that the Black Lives Matter movement last year in the summer was really hitting big in the media. As a BRZ, we went to our own constituents on 17th Avenue Southeast and International Avenue, because we do have Black owners, and we asked them, okay, instead of assuming what people are saying, what is your opinion? And what we had found from polling the people who own businesses, that people of color, they were saying, we don't want less police, we want more police. You have no idea what it's like to be from the countries where we are, and there's no one who comes when you have a problem. And so they're, they understand that it's not perfect, and some of them have had stories of problems, absolutely, but they don't want to reduce it. So I think what it really is, and I've spoken with certain members of the police, including the head of the union for the police, and I think what it really boils down to is it's more along the lines of appropriate use of the police, or appropriate use of the different organizations we have here in Calgary. So if it's enforcement of of trying to work with people who are on addictions, right?
Yeah.
We have an amazing team called the Dope Team here in Calgary, and they do incredible work. I think that I know that a lot of people speak highly of them, but I don't think we give them enough of a spotlight. I think they're more appropriate for dealing with addictions than they would be a beat police officer, right? And then also, we also have other organizations. For example, we've got bylaw. So we have bylaw that works from 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Now, there's a couple of things there. So what happens is from 9 to 5, they work very hard. They do great work. I think some of their the way that they're utilized could be improved as well. But then after 5 o'clock, who answers the phone? It's the police.
Mm-hmm.
And so the police have been saying to me when I've been interviewing many of them is that they almost feel they're in a no-win situation. That if they try to do the best with the little training that they have, then they get into trouble. If they don't do anything, then they get into trouble. And so some of them have said that if they feel that they're in a no-win game, they almost just as soon not play the game at all. So we've noticed that now, instead of having 2,200 police officers that we're supposed to have that are uniformed and working, we're down to around 1,900, 1,950 right now. So we're way undermanned. And when you underman that organization, that creates further stress. In some areas of the city, we're below 35% below what we're supposed to be in terms of police coverage.
Yeah.
So then you've now undermanned them, and you're expecting more of them to understand. So I think it's a matter of really looking at it from an open perspective,
right,
and not labeling. When we start to label people and say you are this and you are how about we just put a label that we're all Calgarians?
All right. You talked about policing stress, because one of the other changes that might add more stress to the police is the decrease in the residential speed limit to 40 kilometers per hour. Did you support that move? And if you did, tell me why. And if you didn't, tell me why.
It's funny because I spoke with my son about that, and he said, "Dad, if you become a city councillor, don't reduce the speed because I like it. I like going fast, Dad." So I kind of chuckled. I said, "Well, I don't think
maybe
that's
not
really,
the best argument.
I really don't think that's what we're supposed to be doing here, son." But in all seriousness, I think it has shown that if you do reduce speed, it does save lives. It reduces the carnage when someone gets impacted. It does have to get balanced out with being able to get things moving. But now, I did live in Japan for a long time, and their speed limits, they have 120 million people in the area of southern Alberta. Okay, that just to kind of give you some perspective. So they have a lot more cars on the road, and so yes, cars do tend to move a little bit slower there. I mean, there's no real speed limits of 100 kilometers an hour. But in terms of but if you do want to reduce, I'm not convinced that just telling people that it's now 40 will automatically reduce that. Case in point, Deerfoot Trail. Deerfoot Trail is 100 kilometers an hour. I don't think I've ever seen it, unless it's really bad weather, that people are driving 100 kilometers an hour. They drive over that. And why? Because the road itself was constructed in such a way that it will hold more speed. And so it's more if we're wanting to reduce speed, then there's actually more effective ways. Now, we've been doing this over on International Avenue. When we redid the whole avenue, we came up with ways that we could limit some of the speed, where you narrow the laneways so that the way that they're not as wide, so people don't feel as comfortable to speed. Okay, so then that naturally starts to reduce the speed without having to go out and try and enforce a 40 kilometer an hour, because again, it's only as good as you can enforce it.
It's a good example. Let me just ask you about the public art program as well, because there has been some controversy with the Big Blue Ring, Beaufort Towers, probably a few others. Do you support the program as it now is, or do you still think there needs to be a different approach to public art?
I'm a huge, and that's where I've come up with a lot of maturity here. When I was a lot younger, I wouldn't have thought art was important at all. I do believe that art is important now. So I do believe that we need to do that. However, the way we do our consultation, again, it's very reflective of what we've spoken about a few times in this interview, is that it's a lack of transparency with the people and a lack of listening. And when you don't involve people, then they immediately suspect anything you do, including artwork. And so I do believe that there would be way better ways of putting to tender, having a more open and transparent tendering process for artwork, so that we don't have issues where people are looking at it like it's a closed network and then they don't trust us.
Right. Okay. A couple final questions
Yes.
that do relate to your role as a council member. So the first one is, we're going to see referenda on the ballot in the fall, one for fluoride, one for daylight savings, another for equalization. And I'm curious to know, do you think that the people should be allowed to decide on more of these types of issues? Or do you think that the role of the elected council member is to make more of the decisions yourself?
I think the role of a council member is much like what I do in real estate. I think we act as a broker. Okay. So to be honest, technically in real estate, I never buy or sell any property. My clients do. But what I do is I broker the deal between them and another party, their lawyers, their inspectors, franchisors, landlords, property managers, all the different interested parties. We bring them together to get everybody's opinions and come up with the best solution for everybody, so that they're all reasonably satisfied with that. And I think we need to kind of do that as a city councilor. So again, I alluded to when the city councilor of Ward 9 went against Inglewood, when they had gone based on his request to go and get the signatures, to go and get the feedback about the redevelopment or the rezoning, and then just summarily dismissed it and went against them. That's a problem. However, you brought up a couple topics. One is the fluoride. Now, fluoride I don't think is a normal topic, because that's one of health, and that's one of a basic staple of life is water. So when we have democracy, sometimes people confuse what democracy is. They think it's just the will of the majority. But we've got a representative democracy here in Canada. We are protected by the charter. So it's the same charter that protects minorities from mob rule. So I do believe absolutely that the role of the councillor is one of a broker who brings people together to listen to them, but also get them to listen to each other and participate. Then come to a consensus to have a decision made, but always with the protection of the minorities at the heart of that. And minorities does not necessarily mean religious or ethnic. It just means people who are in the minority role of that decision.
All right. Last question, because you did also allude to this as well, that there may be times where the city administration is recommending one course of action, but your constituents want you to do something else. What would you do in those cases?
I would probably get them. Well, first of all, I would have the city administration start to consult with the people earlier in the process than they do now. So right now, what we do is we embed for example, I'll take a developer, for example. They'll have a developer that gets embedded with one of the people from the city administration early on. And then they spend 2 or 3 years to come up with a plan that they think that the city of Calgary will be okay with. And then they present it to the constituents. So the problem with that then is it's pitted that developer versus the constituents who have never been consulted very much. So again, if we can have a proper way of actually bringing people together and listening and having them all participate, I don't think we will have very many cases that we have now, where we are going to be in a position where we have to vote against the people or vote for the people. I think that the people are all together. We just need to start bringing them together earlier on and have a coherent way of speaking and listening to each other.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. I sure appreciate it.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You got it. That's John William Wade. He is your council candidate for Ward 9.